Okay, Boker Tov and Shana Tova. We pick up today, today's daf is daf test 9. We are all caught up. We pick up at the bottom of Cherem Bet, and we are in the middle of a discussion about whether somebody riding an animal, and as explained in the Gemara, really means sitting on an animal and holding onto the reins. Is that a kinyan? Number one is rochev. I say rochev. The Gemara's like in this rachuv. I don't know why, but anyway, is rochev a kinyan? And if it is, how does it fare when it's competing against mani, the guy who's leading it? But if the person does what we normally call riding, sitting and making the animal move by kicking it with his legs or something, then that's considered a case of rochev of mani beraglav, and that certainly is a kinyan. But the question is when it comes to by roche by itself, just sitting on the animal and holding the rein. Okay, so now the Gemara says 2 lines on the bottom on Cherem Bet. Shma coming here. If you have 2 people, this is similar, like another scenario similar to the opening Mishnah of our case, of our Mishnah, except our Mishnah had 2 people riding, or 1 person riding, 1 person leading. And this has the difference between a case about Moshe B'Gamal dragging a camel, because by a camel the person would walk in front and sort of the camel would walk behind. So you drag the camel, as it were. That's the word Mashicha. Umanhigin b'chamor, and leading a donkey. I guess in a donkey you'd walk either to the side or behind. Does anybody know?
Yeah, don't you use like a little
switch
to like push them along?
From behind?
I've seen a movie or something.
Okay, that they're like walking behind.
We need to do a field trip to the Bronx too, where they have camel.
You can't walk directly behind the camel either.
No, you walk in front of the camel. You're moshech the camel.
You can't be behind it.
Right, whatever, towards the back and towards the side.
Right.
Okay. So anyway, so whether they were leading the donkey or walking, to the side of the whether they were leading the camel or walking to the side of the donkey, which is the normal way in which you would lead those animals. Or let's say with the same animal, one was leading in front and one was hitting from behind. So you might think in that case, well, maybe the person who's doing the more natural thing for that animal, that should be the better kinyan or the better chazaka, because they're competing in terms of who took possession of it. So, no, in this way they're kona, which means that even if they're competing with one another, one is more natural, nevertheless, they're both a good kinyan. So even the less natural one is a kinyan, and there would both be kona in this case. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, the only kinyan that works is the natural one, leading the camel or walking behind the donkey. Whenever I learn this Gemara, I can't stop. I always think about the Dr. Doolittle, the push me, pull you. Do you remember that?
Yes.
The one, anyway, the 2, whatever. I forget what it was. But the animal that had to be led in one way and led in the other way. Anyway, fine. Okay. So Ketani Mihas. It had 2 heads, was it? Oh, so whichever way. But there was also a point about push and pull. Like one part you have to push, the other pull. Anyway. Okay. Ketani Mihas. We teach nevertheless. The most options it gives you for being kona this animal is drawing, dragging it, leading from in front or leading from the side. In that works of a rachuv low. It sounds like just sitting on the animal would not be a kinyan. So it says no. Hu adin dafilu rachuv. Even sitting on the animal would be a kinyan. The Hadaktani Moshe Manhig. So why does it give those examples? For the obvious reason, because Rabbi Yehuda is going to say it has to be the natural way, right? The leading of the donkey and the walking besides the leading of the camel, the walking beside the donkey. So the Tanakh is saying, I don't care which one you do, and even the better one and even the more natural one doesn't win out over the less natural one. But nobody is discussing the idea of riding. Riding could very easily be a kinyan. Kamash Malan, even if you reverse it, Kani. If that's true, they're being released new. Why separate them off? Why not just, sort of put it all in one challenge and say, if 2 people were leading or were, from in front or were directing from behind or driving, maybe that would be a good word for manhig, to drive, whether a camel or a donkey, either way it works. Why not just put it all together? Why separate it off to say this is the natural way for the camel, this is the natural way for the donkey? So the Gemara says, no, because there would be one way in which it wouldn't work. Which would be the one way would it work? Either the dragging of the donkey, on the idadami hanag b'gamal, or the driving of the camel. What does that mean? It means that the Mishnah, the Breita set up and said, if you drag the camel or drive the donkey, or if in one animal, one person is dragging and one person is driving, okay? But what the Gemara is saying is, one of those animals, it's not telling us which one of those animals, either type of kinyan works. But the other one, actually doing the less natural thing doesn't work. Okay, now it's not telling us which is which. Okay, it might be saying if it's a camel, then whether you're driving or whether you're leading, it works. Okay, or it might be saying if it's a donkey, whether you're driving or leading, it works. But one of those animals doing the unnatural thing does not work. Okay, and that's why it says b'midah zo. It has to be this way. Of course, it's very troublesome. You know, you say it has to be exactly this way, but you're not being clear what that way is. Okay, but that's what it's saying. It's not all one big challenge. It's not that it doesn't matter at all. There is one animal that doing it one way, and the not natural way for that animal doesn't work, but it's not clear which is.
Isn't the Talmud telling us the one that doesn't work is Meshicha b'chamor and Hanhaga b'gam?
No, that's what Rabbi Yehuda says. Rabbi Yehuda says if it's the unnatural thing for either animal, it doesn't work. Whereas the Tanna Kamma is clearly saying that you could do both types of thing for one animal and it could work. Either type of thing for an animal could work. But what the Gemara is saying is that the exclusive word, b'midah zo, this way, which seems to say there's another way that it doesn't work, it has nothing to do with rochev. The other way that it doesn't work is the unnatural thing for the other animal. But it's not telling us which is which is not so helpful from a halachic point of view. Okay, now the Gemara says like this: the east most of Sefer. Some ask this from the end of this Breita, okay, not from the first part where it says rochev or a manhig, but the second part where it says b'midah zo. Okay, I'm sorry, not rochev. Excuse me, moshech or manhig. The east most of Sefer. B'midah zo kana. This is the way that you do the kinyan. What is that excluding? That seems to be only this way. And since the Breita seem to allow doing the reverse, what's it coming to exclude? So limute mai, lav limute rachuv. Isn't it coming to exclude a case of a guy just sitting on the animal? No, it's coming to exclude reversing it, doing the not natural way. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. Rabbi Yehuda says it has to be the natural way of leading or driving. No. The Tanna Kamma clearly allows you in one of the animals to do the unnatural one, but the other animal it doesn't. Some say the one thing that doesn't work is dragging the donkey. The Istami, and some say Hanaga b'gamal. No, it's driving the camel. Okay. Anyway, whatever it is, they're talking about the fact that the relative benefits of driving versus leading when it's the not natural thing for the animal, but they are completely not relating to the question of rochev. Okay, that Breita is irrelevant to rochev. Nobody was even talking or thinking about it. The issue there was if you do the way of getting the animal to move in a not natural way, would that still be a kinyan or not? Okay, so now the Gemara says like this. Tashma, let's try to prove the rochev issue yet again. Echad rochev chamor ve'echad tafas b'mosira. Here you got a Breita that explicitly deals with sitting on the donkey. Now, of course, anytime it says rachuv, you don't know if it's talking about just sitting or what the Gemara calls manhig b'raglav, what we would call riding, having it move, which then would be more obvious. So we'll see. But we're going to assume it means just sitting and is relevant for our discussion. So yes.
I just don't understand the underpinnings of this whole conversation. Wouldn't one think that you make a kinyan by demonstrating control over the getting it to move anyway under your direction would seem to be adequate no matter how you did it.
I'm also thinking about.
Oh, you're talking about the hanhaga versus the machine.
Riding it, pulling it, dragging it, leading it.
What's the concept?
I don't know. Really, I would say the opposite. I would say if I don't know what I am doing with the thing, okay. I'm reminded of the time when I once went when Vern and I were on vacation and we were some Greek island or whatever, and we rented motorized scooters and neither of us knew what the heck we were doing, and we were on it for about 2 seconds and it sort of went out from under us and the guy said, "Give them back to me. I'm canceling the rental." So anyway, so you can get it to move and not know what you're doing and do it in a bizarre way that doesn't demonstrate bias, that demonstrates like incompetence, you know. So, but that presumably is the debate between Rabbi and the Chachamim, you know.
So incompetence is not code.
Right. Okay. I mean, there are incompetent owners. I'm sure that's true. Okay, but I'm not sure that just getting it to move in a way that doesn't show you really understand it and know how to use it is a demonstration of ownership. All right, so now the Gemara says like this. Kashma, echad rochav chamor ve'echad tafus b'mosira. If one person is riding, and again, we don't know whether riding means just sitting or not, but we're going to assume it does, on a donkey, and the other person is holding on to the reins, okay, or mosir might mean the, what's it called, the bridle, yeah. Although it sounds more when it speaks about handing it over that you're talking about the reins. But anyway, zeh kana chamor ve'zeh kana mosira. So the guy on the donkey, that's a kinyan on the donkey, holding the reins, as we discussed before. If I hand over the reins, the act of handing over is a kinyan. But if you find a lost object, a donkey, and you grab the reins, grabbing the reins is not a kinyan. A kinyan is mashicha, making it move, or we're discussing rochev, sitting on it. But grabbing the reins for a lost object is not a kinyan on the animal. Okay, it needs to be handed over by the owner. So therefore, in this case, I jumped on the donkey and you grabbed the reins. I'm kone the donkey and you're kone the reins. Okay, zeh kana chamor, zeh kana mosira. Shema mina. So you hear from this, rachuv kani. Look, just sitting on it is a kinyan. So that's, of course, you can never really prove it because hachanami b'mani b'raglav. Who says we're talking about just sitting on it? We're talking about what we would call riding. You're using your legs and you're getting it to move. So therefore, that's a kinyan of manhig. That's a kinyan of leading, a kinyan of meshicha. That's not the rachuv that you're asking about. Okay, Yehochi says the Gemara, if you're talking about a real kinyan of manhig, like something we know is a good, strong kinyan, nikni nami rachuv b'mosira. Why does the guy who's riding it not also get the reins? Now, why should he get the reins? Is it because he's considered to be like doing a mashicha on the reins? If he gets the animal to move, he's causing the reins to move a little with him. Is it because the reins are considered to be one unit together with the animal? And if you're kona the animal, you're kona the reins. Yeah. So we'll see about that in a little while. The Gemara is going to discuss if you do a kinyan on the animal, are you automatically kona the objects that are on the animal? Even there's differences. There's like if the animal is carrying, like a donkey has saddlebags and it's got wares on it, that is conceptually distinct. It's being carried by the donkey. So being kona the donkey doesn't necessarily mean, let's say it was a hefker donkey and in it had sacks that had stuff in it. There's a kinyan on the donkey, a kinyan on the sacks, right? Or do we say, no, those are conceptually separate things. You need a separate kinyan on the sacks. But here, the bridle certainly logically would be considered to be one. Okay? So anyways, that's the most question. If you're doing a kinyan on the donkey, why are you not also kona the reins? So the Gemara says, Ella, fine, says the Gemara. Fine, let's switch the girsa of the Breita. If it weren't enough to say you get the donkey, he gets the reins, we're going to say you get the donkey and half of the reins, and the other guy gets the half of the reins, okay, or the bridle, whichever it is. So you each get half. So the Gemara says, 1 minute, that doesn't make sense either. I get why the guy on the donkey is kona half. The kamagbele ben das. We're getting back to the case of two people picking up a Metzia at the same time.
Exactly.
Right? Where, so this is, again, it's not exactly clear, right, what kinyan we're conceptualizing the person on the donkey doing. Like the person who picks up the reins, he's doing a hagbah. Okay, he's picking the reins off the ground, like, but it's only a hagbah in half because the other half of the reins is attached to the bridle on the donkey. He didn't pick that off. That was always suspended. Okay, so we're going to ask, what type of a kinyan is it that I picked the reins off the ground? I didn't pick the entire thing. I picked the part was on the ground off the ground, but the other part was always suspended. Okay, so why does he get anything? All right, so let's take a look.
And the other guy, meanwhile, is sitting on the behemoth, so it's as if he has some relationship to the reins.
Yeah, so he's doing a kinyan on the behemoth. He's getting the behemoth to move. He's manik baraglav. So we get that he gets the reins. Okay, now why does he get the reins if the other guy's holding on to half of it? So that could be, again, if they were both kona, you could say they're both doing it for themselves and for one another. So, right, like we said before, even if they're not intending to, we define it as if they're doing that. Okay, but let's take a look. Gemara says like this. I get why the guy on the donkey gets half the reins. The kamagbele ben das, the guy who picks it up, could be understood to be picking it up for himself and for the guy on the donkey if that's a necessary part of him being kona. Ella toughest b'mosira b'may kani. But how does the guy on the reins kona? Okay. So now again, like why it assumes that the guy riding on the donkey isn't also doing his half to help the guy with the reins, it could be that the Gemara just understands it's like you're mixing and matching different things. The guy who picks up the reins is doing the kinyan hagbah. The guy on the donkey might be causing the reins to move if he's getting the donkey to move, right? But that's not a kinyan hagbah. So still, the guy on the floor did not do a full kinyan hagbah. He only picked up half the object. Picking up half and having the other half moved because the donkey is moving does not combine to make a whole kinyan. Okay, but I still don't get how it combines in the opposite direction. I'm getting the donkey to move, and the other guy's holding it. Why does that combine to make me kona? So it's not exactly clear to me why the Gemara understands that the kinyan done by the guy picking up the reins helps for the guy on the donkey, but not vice versa.
If they're playing around with kona l'nafshe, kona
I understand. I just don't understand why the Gemara understands there to be an asymmetry. Why does your picking up the reins help me, but my riding the donkey doesn't help you? Okay.
Why do you need help if you're riding the donkey?
Well, because
the other guy's half of the reins.
Right. So meaning, if you understand, I get part of this question is why are we assuming that I own the reins? Is it because I make the reins move? If I made the reins move, I do need help because you're sort of holding on to them and not letting them move from their place. Okay. But if it's because it's one package with the donkey, and if I'm kona the donkey, I'm kona the reins, then I certainly don't need help. But that's the way the Gemara frames it. The Gemara frames it as you're picking up the reins. We get why that helps me, which assumes like I need it to help me. Okay, but why does my riding of the donkey help you? But I don't get it. Like if your hagbah can help my mashicha, why can't my mashicha help your hagbah? And I really don't get the asymmetry. And your question, I also is a good question. Why do I even need your hagbah, especially if you conceptualize it as one package? So I don't understand what sort of how the Gemara is understanding the problem. Let's see what the Gemara answers. Okay, so the Gemara says. If I completely change the girsa of the Breita, the guy on the donkey gets the donkey and the bridle and the reins. It's like one package, okay? And again, that makes sense if, as Gunnar was pointing out, if you consider it one package, I don't need the other guy's help at all. Since I'm coated the donkey, I get everything. And the thing that the guy who picked up the reins, the only thing he gets is what's in his hand. Because we said before, what's in your hand is like it's cut off. So that you did a full kinyan on.
That's like the star case.
Yeah, exactly. Even if you didn't do a kinyan on the rest of the reins. Okay, because that cutting much at Tavas Biyado. So it says one minute. Hi, my. What sense does this make? If we say that you could pick up something for your friend, a lost object, and he could own it, when is that true? That's if I see this nice lost object, I see this wall in the street, the owner $20 or whatever the street, and I figure I'm going to do it for Charlie. I like Charlie, and I intentionally do it for Charlie. Hi, this guy, right? When each one is picking it up, they really only want it for themselves. If they're doing it for the other person, it's only because being kona for the other person is necessary to let them be kona for themselves. Hi, in this case, you're picking it up for yourself. The guy who picks up the reins. So, if he's not going to get the reins, he's only going to get what's in his hands. Then he wouldn't want the guy on the donkey to get the reins. He's not picking it up on behalf of the guy's donkey. So you see, Jenna, unfortunately, not like you wanted to say, that the Gemara is consistent with what it assumed before, that somehow it thinks you need the picking up that's being done by the guy to help the guy on the donkey. So it's not like he gets it as a package together with the donkey. But again, what I still don't get is, why can a hagbah help me with my mashicha on the reins, but my mashicha can't help the guy with his hagbah? I'm not exactly sure how that works, but that's the Gemara's question. So your hagbah, if you're not going to get part of the reins, you're not going to do it for me. Okay? And therefore, so the Gemara winds up, it feels like the Gemara sort of did this before. It doesn't allow for asymmetry. As soon as you introduce asymmetry, then I'm not going to do what I need to do for you if you're not helping me out either. Okay, 1 minute. So the Gemara's answer is, fine. Let's try to switch it a third time. This one gets the donkey and like this is, I think, the bridle, the thing directly on the sort of, the bit in the mouth of the donkey. Okay, that is one unit with the donkey, or that maybe is independent from the reins and doesn't need the assistance of the guy with the reins. The other guy gets the part that's in his hand itself. That's like it's cut off. Each one gets the piece that's considered sort of totally theirs, unrelated to the rest. Okay, the ashar, the reins in the middle that are now suspended in air. One guy has the hand, the other has the bridle. The rest of the reins are suspended in midair. In that case, lo kana lo zeh v'lo zeh. Neither one gets it. Since the guy picking it up is not able to get assistance from the guy on the donkey. The guy on the donkey's kinyan doesn't help for the guy picking it up for whatever reason. Hagbah needs another part hagbah. It needs the other part lifted up. The other part being moved doesn't work. So since he's not getting his half, he's not doing what he needs to help the other guy get his half, and therefore the stuff in the middle remains ownerless, okay? And anybody can come and grab the reins in the middle. Clear to everybody? Okay, we're back to our asymmetry from before. Anyway, we have not resolved the question about rochev and whether that works.
Linzer,
yes.
I just had the thought, there is a difference. In other words, I'm the guy on the ground. I pick up the piece of the rein. So it's in my hand.
Right.
The guy on the animal, it's like a grumma. Like, in other words, he's not directly touching those reins.
Right.
Not directly holding it. It's
Right.
only agav the behemoth.
Right.
So that's the difference between the two, right? In other words,
That one's against it.
And therefore what? Therefore
How's he helping?
who should be? I don't understand. So
I think
I don't understand why that explains the asymmetry in the direction it works. Why does your hagbah not help me? My moving it can help you, but your hagbah. I think it's because hagbah, for it to be a hagbah, you need to say all parts of the object were lifted off the ground. And at the end of the day, the fact that it was already suspended and I just moved the part that was suspended, you cannot conceptualize that as a hagbah because the whole object was not lifted up.
mm-hmm.
Whereas if I'm doing the mashicha and making it move, and you're doing a hagbah, from that perspective, it's like, all parts of the object are moving. One's moving vertical, horizontal, and the other somehow moving vertical. Somehow those two are understood as combined.
It makes sense. If you're riding the animal and you kick it and it takes off, it's going to take the reins with it.
Right.
But if I'm sitting here moving the reins up and down, that's not necessarily going to move the animal.
Right. But that would be why my moving could work by itself. It still doesn't exactly explain why it needs your assist. Right.
Well,
Yeah,
because there's part of it that's
you.
attached to the animal that's not moving. Right, the way reins.
So the fact that you're assisting somehow, you're saying the fact that you're lifting it up somehow. If you
to
weren't,
get the whole bridle.
if you were lifting it up without intending to assist, then it wouldn't be able to move forward. You would hold it back.
So the part
but the
that's
fact that you're
attached to
willing to lift it up. So what you're saying is you're trying to see the hagbah as like a virtual mashicha. Like the fact that you're lifting it up is read as a willingness to move it forward. Somehow as if I'm moving it forward, right? Because if I'm not lifting it up, but I'm holding it tight, you're still not being. You're still limited to how far you can go, right?
Right.
It's still not exactly clear, but somehow hagbah requires both parts lifted up. But mashicha, if I'm moving forward, a little assist from you is enough to help. It's not exactly clear why they understand the asymmetry. Anyway, let's take now an attempt to restore the bright to its original meaning. Amar Rav Ashi says Rav Ashi. I'm sorry, just read that. As Rabbi Yavo says, La'olam k'diktani. Really, it's like it said originally. The guy lifting it up gets the whole reins, even though he only lifted up half of the reins. The other half was already suspended. Hov yochel not go lavia etzlo. A hagbah on half of the object is good if the other half is suspended. Why? Because you could yank it and bring the whole thing to you. Now, what does that mean? Rashi understands that this would be true even if the whole object was started on the ground. If I lift up part of an object, and imagine just a little piece of it is on the ground, and I could do a yank, and with my yank, I haven't done the yank, but I could do a yank, and the rest would lift off, then it's like I've already lifted it all off the ground. So whether it all starts on the ground or part starts suspended, Rashi just says it's easier if it's suspended, if you imagine like a big talus or a big rein, and you do a yank, right? So if it was a big talus and most was on the ground, I did a yank, it wouldn't all come off. But if it starts suspended and I did a yank, right, then it does all get off, right? If once it gets off the table it's suspended on, it remains all in midair for a brief minute before it falls down. But Rashi understands that whether it's starting suspended or not, according to Rabbi Yavahu, if you lift up part of the object, and in theory, if you just did a yank, you could get it all off the ground, it's like you lifted it all off the ground. One could argue that Rabbi Yavahu is only saying this when part of the object started off the ground. Because if you think about it, right, I lifted part, the whole object is currently off the ground, and the fact that I didn't lift that other part off the ground, it just started that way. Well, if I could yank it, that makes it enough like it's all part of my act, So it's not clear to me that Rabbi Yavo would say the same if it all started on the ground. But either way, Rabbi Yavo is saying, I don't need the assist of the guy on the donkey. I lifted up my half. In theory, I could yank it. Okay, maybe he wasn't attached to the donkey's mouth. I don't know if this requires the guy who lifted up the reins. I don't know.
On the ground.
Yeah. I don't know if this needs the fact that were it not on the donkey, attached to the bridle, because if it is attached to the bridle, I don't think it's going to work. But anyway, he says that is enough of a kinyan hagbah. You lifted half of it off the ground, the other half is suspended. that's enough of a kinyan hagba. And that's why the guy on the ground does not need the assist of the other guy. Okay, so the Gemara says, that seems like a pretty reasonable answer. The Gemara does not like it. Rabbi Yavo, Brucey, or B'dusi, that's Rabbi Yavo's statement, that's wrong, or that's a joke, depending on what your girsa is. B'dusa would mean it's a joke. Okay, the Ilote Ma'achi, if you don't say that, because if you don't say it's a joke, if you say Rabbi Yavo is right, I'm going to do a reductio ad absurdum. Now, it's not so absurd, but here's what the Gemara says. If you think you have a cloak that's half on the ground and half on a table, or on some type of a pillar, somebody lifted up half from the ground, and somebody else took half off of the the pillar. So hachanami the kamakani basu okani. Did you say the first one was kona and not the last one? Just because he could yank it and bring it to himself. So clearly Rabbi Yavo is wrong. Of course, Tosa says, yeah, and what's so absurd about that? Why not? That's just as reasonable as the other thing. Right? If you look at Tosa says, Dilo Tema Hachi, this little Tosa says, Ksas Kasha. Rabbi Yavo off Rabbi Yavo, right? That seems pretty reasonable. If you asked any of you before coming here, okay, you all know about a kinyan hagba. What would you say about a house that's half on the ground and half on the table, and you lifted the part off the ground fully off the ground? Does that work or not? I think probably half of us would say, maybe all of us would say, yeah, that sounds like that should work. That sounds like a good kinyan hagba, which is what Rabbi Yavo is saying. Okay, you didn't lift all of it, but it's all not right now off the ground, and in theory you could bring the rest of it towards you. Okay, so that's what Rabbi Yavo says seems totally reasonable, and that's why he says the guy is kona the reins, but the Gemara considers that to be absurd. It's not a kinyan hagba, and therefore it says nobody is kona the reins. Yes, Charlie.
Some things are, such as the reins, are impractical to lift. You're not going to be able to lift the ring that's connected to the donkey's head.
I know. Well, that's the point here. Yeah.
But and in a garment the same way, some pieces of cloth are going to be so big that nobody could lift them.
Right. Well, you could. There's other ways you could be kona it, or you could wrap them all. You could wrap it up and lift it, or whatever. That's correct.
Isn't Rashi assuming here that the guy on the ground pulls it and it comes off the head of the animal?
Well, that's what the Gemara says.
Right? The most.
Oh, yes, you're right. Rashi does say. Yeah, you're right. Rashi does sound like even though it's attached,
it'll come off, and he's got an advantage because he doesn't have to pull up; he pulls down.
I understand. Yeah, no, that we talked about. The Rashi does because it starts suspended. It works better than if it's on the ground. It sounds like it comes off. Yeah. But it does sound like it's.
Rabbi Yavo these or just
no Rabbi Yavo. No, it's true. But Rashi does sound like even if it's like. If it's physically currently attached to the donkey, then you have to literally be able to yank it off the donkey's head. But Rashi also sounds that according to Rabbi Yavo, even if it was all on the ground and I lifted half, if I could yank the rest, it would work. I'm not so sure. It seems to me that Rabbi Yavo is only saying it because it's all suspended. But either way, the Gemara rejects Rabbi Yavo. Okay, even though that was conceptually made a lot of sense and was a nice explanation of the Breita, for whatever reason, the Gemara rejects it. Okay, back to the question of whether Rachav works. Tashma, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Rachav b'sadeh umani b'ir kana. If a guy is riding in the field where it's natural to ride, or leading in the city people don't ride, it's considered not to be tsanua, the way Rashi says it. Okay, you lead your animal in the city. Also, maybe it's considered dangerous. I think in Rome you were not allowed to. Is this true? Why do I have a vague recollection that in Rome you were not allowed to ride on animals in the city itself? Do you know anything about that, Charlie?
That sounds right.
Yeah,
it's too crowded.
Yeah,
you have to walk your bicycle across
exactly.
The
okay. Anyway, so here again we get the question about if you do things in an unnatural way. Okay, kana. So presumably the point being that it sounds like that if you were to be riding it in the city, it would not work. Presumably leading it in a field would work, but riding in a city or a town would be not natural and would not work. So anyway, but you see that riding works. So it says hachanami mani. No, we're not talking about just sitting. We're talking about riding. We're talking about sitting and using your legs to make it move. Okay, mani baragla. Ihachi says if that's true, hainu mani. So why do you have to tell me rachav and mani? They're two forms of mani. Tregavni mani. There are two types of mani, and they don't both work in both places. Ihachi rachav bi'ir my time alokani. So why is it if it's basically just a form of manig? Then why is it that it doesn't work in the city, in the town? So Amrav Kahana, okay, I sort of gave that away ahead. Because people don't naturally ride into town. So therefore, even though if it were like a weak Kenyan, you're just sitting on it. So, Tosa says, maybe we would have understood it if you're just sitting on it. You're just sitting on it in the city, and there's so many people around in the city. You're sitting on it isn't anything. It's like not moving, and you're just, it's meaningless. Maybe out in the field you're sitting on it, and it moves a little bit more because you're sitting on it. But if Rachuv means you're literally riding it and making it move, then the Gemara says, and it should work just as well in the town. So it says, no. It's a different reason. It's because it's not a natural thing to do. Sort of like the discussion before about the donkey and the camel. Maybe doing it in a way that's not natural, especially a way that's not natural that, that is seen as for whatever reason, not demonstrating ownership. Okay, that you're not going to be Kohen. So, Lefishing Dargan Shabbat Adam Lirchov Be'ir. So I'm Liravashi Laftahana, El Me'ata. So now we're going to challenge this. It's when is doing an act of a Kenyan in a weird way, not an act of a Kenyan. He'd be a Arniki b'Shabbat. Let's say you lifted up a wallet on Shabbos to be Kohen. She'ain darkin Shabbat Adam like be a Arniki b'Shabbat. Most people don't handle wallets on Shabbos. So Hakanami to Lukani, would you say it doesn't work? If it's a Kenyan, it's a Kenyan. So if Rachav means manig, it's the real classic manig, and you're getting it to move. So then why shouldn't it work if you do it in the town? So Elamai David Avid, by the wallet, if you did it, you did it. You violated Shabbos, but you did it. And it works, you're Kohen. The Kani, Haganami, my David Avid. So you did a weird thing. You rode a donkey in the town, but it should work. The Kani. Okay, so if it's a real Kenyan, so it should work even in the town. If we're talking about a real classic Mani, and you could have referred to the discussion before about Mani and Moshe by a camel and a donkey. So the Gemara says, Ella, you're right. By a Metzia, if you're real, if it would always work. But what are we talking about? We're not talking about a Metzia, we're talking about a sale. And the seller put on a explicit restriction and said, do it in a normal way. Okay, which is like a really out because it doesn't sound like that. Okay, so this is interesting, right? If you look at the camel and the donkey, the leading and the driving, there was a debate that it has to be normal, and the Gemara in the end said one way which is considered particularly not natural doesn't work. Okay, whereas here the Gemara pushes back. It says just because it's not natural, if you're really making it move, it totally should work. Okay, but there's a little difference. Like here it might be natural for the animal, just not natural for the setting. And that's why the Gemara is saying is, if you're riding an animal, that's a total natural way to demonstrate ownership. Just because it's not natural for the setting and it takes place in the town, why should that not be good? And the Gemara's answer is fine. It is good. But we're talking about a special case where the person sold it and stipulated that you have to do it in a way which is natural. Okay, and now the Gemara adds some other stipulations. But if you're doing it in the public domain, not in a side street, that would work even in a town. And if you were an important person, then it works because important people they don't go leading their donkeys. They will ride it, even though it's like a little funny. It's not considered sanua to ride a donkey in town, but it's also not it's considered beneath an important person to lead his donkey. So therefore, it's what? It's not. That's the way Rashi explains. Rashi says, where's Rashi? Rashi says before, Rashi, Mishum Tzniusa, the bottom of the Kedem Aleph. I mean, I don't know. I really have no idea why.
It makes more sense that it's like crowded and you have more control if you're leading it.
And then if you're an Adam Chashuv,
then people get out of your way.
People get out of your way. Maybe. Okay. Maybe. The Adam Chashuv who Kani, it worked in that. The Isha Hikanya. So why by a woman does it work? So Rashi says, because it's easier for a woman to control an animal while riding it than while leading it.
Right, because he got himself into trouble with this sanua stuff.
Right. So now it'd be less sanua for a woman, right? I know. Or if you are a lowly person, it works because then you're not afraid. This is what Rashi says of embarrassing yourself by riding it because you're a lowly person anyway. So somehow it's acceptable for an honorable person to do or for a lowly person to do, but not for your average citizen. Don't ask me. Moving on. Okay. Anyway, here was a case where it sounded like Rochev is Kani, but again, any evidence that Rochev is Kani, the Gemara could just say we're talking about Mani Baraglav. You're not just sitting on it, you're getting it to move, which is a normal Rochev, and then it's actually pretty obvious that it's Kohen. Okay, by Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer asked, Homer l'chavero. Now we're going to sort of deal with a case that gets us a little bit back to the case of the reins. Homer l'chavero. Mishoch behema zo liknos kelim shal lehamahu. You tell your friend, drag this animal in order to take possession of the vessels on it. I'm not selling you the donkey. I'm just selling you the wares on the donkey, and drag the donkey, and you'll be kona the wares. So, mahu, what's the halacha? So first, the Gemara just has a problem with the phrasing of it. Liknos, in order to be kona, miyamalei kni. He didn't say drag this donkey and be kona. It's drag these animals for the purpose. I don't know. Somehow we say, oh, that just means like you do it because you want to be kona. I'm not saying I'm actually being makna to you, which seems pretty bizarre. If I'm telling you drag this in order to be kona, why I should not interpret that to mean that I'm telling you that with this you will be kona sounds a little strange. But anyway, the Gemara says, fine. Ella, you like it, fine. That phrasing is bothering you, I'll adjust the phrasing. Fine. I tell you, drag this donkey and be kona, the vessels on it. What's the story? Now, Tosa says, what's the question? If I'm dragging the donkey, I'm dragging the vessels. And Mashiach works by vessels. So what's the issue? So this is the issue is because when I do a Mashiach on an inanimate object, my power is totally causing the object to move. I'm schlepping it. If I do a Mashiach on a donkey, for example, I'm not schlepping the donkey. I yank on the reins and the donkey moves by itself. So here, that works for a donkey because it's natural. But here, I did not schlepp the bags of grain, right? I yanked on the donkey and the donkey moved the bags of grain. Is that a Mashiach for me to be kona the bags of grain? That's the question, okay? So will that work or not? So the Gemara is not going to answer the question. It's going to digress. Okay, so the Gemara says, "Oh, so Amar Rabba, Amar le kni behema vikni kelim mikani kelim." Rabbi says, "Look, it's so funny. It's like you answer the question with a question. We completely avoid answering it. First we say, oh, you said liknos. You can't say liknos. Okay, fine. He says kine. Oh, wait a minute. You're asking about if you're just being kona the bags of grain. Why weren't you asking about a scenario where I'm telling you be kona the donkey, kona both the donkey and the grain? Presumably in that case, you're taking it for granted that it will work if you're trying to be kona both. Well, that's not so obvious that it will work if you're trying to be kona both. Why should that be any better? Why do you think if you're being kona the donkey, why am I asking the case only are you kona the grain alone? Why should it be more obvious if I say be kona the donkey with the grain that you should be kona both? Okay, so what would you think? Why do you think that might be more obvious?
That's how, I don't know. Why would it?
Well, you could either conceptualize it as one big thing, right? It's really the donkey with its grain, and you like we were discussing before. So if the Kenyan works for the donkey, and I'm willing to sell you both, you look at it all like as a piece of the donkey. But what the Gemara understands is that the reason you would be kona, Rava thinks it's more obvious you should be kona both, is because then once I own the donkey is my object. It's like my chutzner, and then the grain is in my property on top of my donkey, and I'm kona because of a Kenyan chutzner. So Rava says you're asking the question about being kona the grain alone. Sounds like you're taking it for granted that if you're kona the donkey, you do, and the grain, that definitely does work. Not so fast, not necessarily. Yeah, so Rav, so let's take a look. I'm a Rava. I'm like kni beim kni kelim bikani kelim. What do you think that if you said to be kona both, it definitely does work? That's not so obvious. Chatzar me'alechasi. That should only work. He does not conceptualizing it as one unit. Again, maybe that could be conceptualized if it's something like the reins or the saddle, but here it's a load on the donkey that's not conceptualized as one unit. So if that should be kona, it's because the donkey becomes yours, and then you're kona the bags of grain with a Kenyan chutzner. But 1 minute, it's a moving courtyard. It's a moving yard. The chutzner melech is lokanya. The only type of a chutzner that works, we based on another discussion in a different Gemara, is if the chutzner is not moving. A moving chutzner isn't kona. The chutzner melech is lokanya. The chitei mekesham. They say, oh well, if the donkey stops, then the yard isn't moving, so then I can't be kona it. No, our principle is that if something could be moving, and therefore you wouldn't be kona because it's a moving piece of property. So it also doesn't work even if it happens to be standing or sitting. So anything that has the ability to be moving is not enough of property under my control to be worked to allow me to be kona things that are on it. So why is it obvious to you that if you were being kona the donkey, if you were also kona the donkey, you would get the grain with it? That shouldn't work. That's not necessarily a Kenyan chutzner. So the Gemara says, "V'hilchasa what?"
So I'm curious how we got into Kenyan chutzner and we completely out of the Mashiach.
That's what I was saying. We're avoiding the question. I asked the question of does it work on the bags of grain, And rather than answering my question, the first thing you do is you give me a hard time about the phrasing. Then the next thing you do is you're talking about whether it would work if you did both of them together. And the Gemara is never going to come back to answer the first question.
Beforehand, we were comfortable saying that the animal's moving or some sort of kinyan with the bridle.
Right.
And that seems like we completely.
Right, like, yeah, I mean, why the Gemara,
Well, but there was a Metzia, right?
well,
This
the
is like
Tosha
a-
says that the question there about whether my moving helps you with the reins is to some degree based on this
There was
discussion.
one Ashir
Right.
that the person was moving the animal going half of the bridle.
Right.
So I mean, so they're moving, but the animal.
Right, so Tosha says that discussion was a little bit based on this discussion here. Yeah.
We're no longer talking about a Metzia, right? It's Mekach Memkar.
No, we're talking about, we're talking about.
So are you telling me, like, I must be missing something? This is Mekach Memkar. So I have a trucking company. You've ordered some grain. I put your grain in my truck to deliver it to
Right.
you. That's a Chatzir Mahalechet,
Right.
right? My truck. Are you saying that it's possible that I'm Kona the grain that's in my truck that I'm delivering to you?
What?
Tells you to be Kohen.
No, right? In other words, what's the
What?
You're saying a third party is contracted to deliver.
No, you can't be
something?
Kona something against the will of the
Right.
parties. So
So
the question,
what's the
everybody
case?
wants to transfer it. The question is, does it work?
But
Everybody's
what's-
trying to
what's the
affect the
case
transfer.
then? What would be
You're
the case?
trying to transfer your grain to me, and it's currently on your donkey's back. And when I take possession of your donkey, and when I move your donkey, have I yet done a masa kinyan on your grain? You're trying to transfer it to me.
Kohen your grain, also your animal.
So you're talking about that 5-second moment between you're pulling the donkey and actually removing the grain off the saddlebag?
Exactly. If something happens after I've moved the donkey, but before I've actually taken the bags and taken them into
We're
my
talking
house.
about that little
Yeah,
window.
that's what we're always talking about. When is the exact moment that the kinyan takes place? So Rava's question was, whoever's question it was the Rebbe Linzer, does it take place if I got the donkey to move, but I didn't directly shut the grains, it's just the grain moved because it was on the donkey's back. And Rava avoids answering the question and says, well, why aren't you asking about if you were selling the donkey and the grain together?
Right,
It
I
sounds like
understand.
you assume that works, but that doesn't work because the donkey doesn't work as a kinyan chatzah. Yeah.
I don't see how an animal can be a chatzir at all in the way that they're usually laden with saddlebags and all, because they're on the side of the animal, not on the top.
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure that would matter, but I hear the point. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this: V'hilchasa, fine. Why would we assume? Why weren't we asking about the case when you were selling both the donkey and the grain? Because there are cases that would work as a kinyan chatzar. Where would that work as a kinyan chatzar? B'kfusa, if the animal was bound, so it couldn't walk even if it wanted to. Okay, so we've digressed and said, why aren't you talking about the case where it's on the donkey? Presumably, where you're selling also the donkey. Presumably, you assume that case it does work, but that really shouldn't work. But the answer is fine. There are cases of that it would work when the animal was bound up and it couldn't move. Then your mom is schlepping the whole thing. Then it should work on the grain too, because then you're just schlepping the whole thing. But anyway, you still haven't answered the initial question. Now we're going to keep on digressing about the moving chutzah. So Amalei Rav Papa Rav Huna Brei Rav Yoshua LeRava. So Rav Papa Rav Huna said to Rava, Elamiata Mahalich Bisfina. Rava, you're saying that you can't be kona a moving chutzah, even if it's natural for it to move. So if you're going on your boat, you own the boat. Yeah, it's your property. And some fish flew in, flying fish flew into your boat. Okay, or so, and they're now on your boat, on your property. You would say, you'd say you wouldn't be kona because the boat is a moving chutzah. So I'm like, no, no, the boat is stationary. It's not moving on its own accord. It doesn't propel itself. The water is just moving underneath it. Okay, even if it's got, what do you mean? No, even if it's got oars or it's got an engine,
oars or sails.
You as a human being are moving the boat. The boat itself is an inanimate, unmoving object left to its own devices. You can totally understand this. If I am a human being, because the other case of Chatzim Malechus is a slave, if right, or if we're dealing with a human being, or if we're dealing with an animal, so they have will of their own, they move themselves. So to the degree that I say something on this human being and on this animal is on my property and I'm in control of it, when that animal's will or that human being's will can choose to move and get out of my control, I totally understand it, okay?
So a car would work.
A car would work. I'm the one who moves the car. Exactly.
What about a cart?
A cart,
That's
yeah.
attached to a horse.
Sure. Yeah, a cart that's attached to the horse would work. I would say yes. Okay, wait, let's see the next case in the Gemara. Okay, Amalei Ravina Ravashti. So Ravina said to Ravashti, Elamiata, Haisem Elechos B'Rishus Harabim. A woman was going to Rishus Harabim. Zarkwa get l'tocheka l'toch chalasa, and somebody threw a get into her, like into her cloak or into her the hat on her head, the basket on her head. Hachanami d'lo magarsha. Would you say it's not because the basket is moving? So it's the same answer. No, the basket is stationary. She's moving the basket, okay, which makes total sense. It doesn't mean that the thing can't be moving. It means it cannot, and that's why it doesn't matter if the animal happens to be standing. The problem is not the fact that it's stationary or moving. The problem is whether it moves on its own accord, whether it's able to move through its own will. Okay, and if something can move on its own will, it's not totally under my control that it works as a kinyan chatzar. So we've had a nice little digression about kinyan chatzar, and we never got back to answer the question, which is, if I move the donkey and I'm not kona the donkey, but that caused the grain on the donkey's back to move, is that also a kinyan mashicha on the grain? And we never answered that question.
Why is she not megureshet?
He raised his hand. He is megureshet.
So a cart or a wagon or a car or truck is a chatzar.
Correct.
So does that apply to Shabbat law as well?
Yes. Yes, there is an interesting question the Gemara has about something that's stationary. Like if I throw something onto something that's floating, is that considered that I've placed it down in a stationary way on Shabbos because it's stationary vis-a-vis the thing it's on, but not vis-a-vis the large, the area. Okay. Anyway, so that's what happens when people move on their own. Okay, anyway, moving on. Okay, so Haya Rochev Agabi Behema, Varasa Metzia. Now we've been alluding to the discussion of Magvia Metzia Lechaveiro, picking up a Metzia for your friend doesn't work. Now we're finally going to get to it through a debate of how to interpret this next Mishnah. Okay. Notice, by the way, that this is, although the first Mishnah is what classic people think about Baba Kama, two people holding on to something, arguing, how do you do a fair division, all this focus on what's a fair division. In a way, it's really a discussion in the context of finding a Metzia. And sort of classically, the way a lot of Masechtos begin is you don't start with some simple rules. Here's when you get to keep a Metzia that you find. No, you start with some bizarre case. Two people find it at the same time, they're arguing about it, who do you award it to? Similarly here, we have a more unusual cases of Metzia until we get to the more classic ones that are coming up in the second parak. Okay, so here's the case. You were riding on an animal, and you saw, oh my gosh, $20. I see him lying in the street in front of me. And Charlie here is walking alongside of me, and I don't want to get off of my donkey. So I say to Charlie, Tanali, Charlie, look, there's $20 there. Go take that from me. Okay. Charlie picks up the $20. So Amar, and he's a chisiba. Okay, I got it. It's mine. Okay. So Zachiba, he gets to keep it. All right. Even though I told him to do it, he's entitled to pick it up for himself. Okay. But after Charlie gives me the $20, he said, actually, when I picked it up, I was picking it up for myself. Then lo amar klum. Good luck, Charlie. Good luck. Right? Try to prove that. Okay, your claim means nothing once you've given it to me. But when you said it and it was in your hand, even though I asked you to do it, you did it for yourself. That works. Okay. Now what's not spelled out here is it sounds like though if he picked it up for me, I am Kona. Right? It's only because he picked it up for himself. And then he's believed as long as he's still in possession of it. Okay, so that seems to be Magbia Metzia Lekavero, Kana Chavero. Had he done it for me, it would have worked. So let's see what the Gemara says.
You only think of the fellow who pointed it out to you.
Right, no, there's no idea of a finder's fee or anything like that. Right, that's like that first stop in the Gemara. It says, you might think that Ani Metzatia meant I saw it first. But seeing it first does not entitle you to it. I know, that's the surprising thing. Like it says, like, Charlie can pick it up, and he only saw it because I pointed it out to him. And he's totally Kona, right? And it does, and once again, it does not deal with the ethical issues involved in that. Yeah. All right, it's not Hassan. We thought over there. Somebody picked up Peya, not for himself. Okay, the corner that's left for the ani. Amar Harezo Ploni ani. I'm picking it up for Reuven, the poor person. Rabbi Eliezer Merzochalo. So that works. It now belongs to Reuven. No, it does not work. And you have to give it. You're not the owner of the field, by the way. Rocky points out the owner of the field. Even if you're an ani, you cannot pick up your own grain. Okay, but you're a third party. Okay, it did not work for Ruvain, and the first ani, it still remains pay, and it's hefker to any aniyim, and the first ani has a right to it. All right, so sounds like a case of sort of like of a Magbia Metzia. So Amar Ula said, Amar Rabbi Yosef ben Levi, Machlokes me ashir lo'ani. The debate is, I'm a rich person, and I'm not entitled to payah, and I'm picking up the payah for a poor person who is. Rabbi Eliezer Savar. Now, in order for this to work, for me to pick up the payah for Ruvain, you have to do two steps. What are the two steps? Number one, migo di bay mafke nichse vavi ani v'chazile. In theory, I could pick up the payah for myself. Why? If I wanted to renounce ownership of all my property and become a pauper, then I could, in theory, do that, and then I'd be entitled to the payah. So, because I'm theoretically, the payah is relevant to me, not in my current state, but I could be mafkir all my money. So, then it's considered to be, since theoretically I could be in a state where I could pay possession, it's considered to be something that in theory that is fit for me to own. And that's stage number one. And stage number two is, and since I could be koneh for myself if I wanted to, I'm entitled to be zocha for somebody else. So how can I pick it up for Ruvain? It's not enough to say, because I could pick it up for myself and I can pick it up for Ruvain. I can't in my current state, but I could get myself into a state where I would be entitled to pick it up. And then because in that state, since I'd be entitled to, I could also not pick it up for Ruvain, 2 degrees removed. And therefore I can do it. Rabbanan Savi and the rabbis hold, Chad migo amrina, trei migo lo amrina. No. If you were an ani and you only had to do 1 step removed, I could take it for myself, I'll pick it up for somebody else. That would work. But 2 steps removed, I could become an ani and I could pick it up for myself in theory. That we won't say. That's one way of framing the debate, that we're talking that a ashir is picking it up. So what would that mean? It would mean, awol ani la ani, if the guy picking it up himself was an ani, and he was doing it for another ani, then everybody would agree it would work, because that's only 1 step removed. The migo the zachin l'nafshe, since you could take possession for yourself, zachin nami l'chaver, you can for somebody else. That's the case of magbia metzia l'chaver. So one way of framing it is everybody agrees magbia metzia l'chaver works. If you could take it for yourself, you could take it for someone else. But the question here is, you can't take it for yourself in your current state. 1 minute. That's one way of framing it. Amalei Rav Nachman said, Le'ula, v'leima mar, why are you framing it that way? Why not say, me'ani la'ani machlokas? Maybe we're assuming the guy picking it up is also an ani. They're both aniyim, the picking it up and the one it's being picked up for. And the debate is, can you be magbia metzia l'chaveiro? You could pick it up for yourself. Are you entitled to pick it up for someone else? And that's the debate, whether you can take the payah for another ani. Okay, now why should I think there's a debate about Magbia Metzia? Because he says, let's look at our Mishnah. That's what he thinks is going on in our Mishnah, that you can't pick it up for somebody else. Now Metzia, a lost object, a kolani Metzla. Everybody, it's like one of those, SAT analogies. Poor person to payah. No, payah to poor person is like Metzia to everyone. Okay, because only poor people are allowed to take payah, but anyone can take a metzia. So everyone for a metzia is like a poor person. Everyone is entitled. Okay, so v'tnan, and why should I think it doesn't work for me to pick up a lost object for somebody else? You say to your friend, go get it. He says, I took possession. Now he thinks I took possession does not mean I took possession first when I picked it up. He thinks when Charlie comes and says, I took possession of the $20, Charlie is saying to me, yeah, I picked it up for you, but I've changed my mind. I'm just going to keep it now. And until Charlie gives it to me, he's reading the Mishnah. Once he gives it to me, he can't say that. But until the moment he gives it to me, he can decide to just pocket it. Okay, why should that be? That's because Magbia Metzia L'Chaveiro Lo Kana Chaveiro. That's how he's reading the Mishnah. Okay. If there's a debate, even for an ani picking it up for an ani, that maybe according to one opinion you can't do it, you can do it for yourself, but you can't do it for someone else. In our Mishnah is the Rabbanan. They say you can't get payah for another ani. You can get it for yourself if you're an ani, but not for another one. And that's why in our Mishnah, Charlie could have taken the 20 for himself, but if he initially took it, I'm sorry, did I read that wrong? The Rabbanan say what? The Rabbanan say You can't do it for somebody else. Right. So I'm sorry. Right. So the Rabbanan say you can't get the payoff for somebody else. So Charlie also, even if he was trying to get the $20 from me, it didn't work. And therefore he's always entitled to keep it to himself. So Masnisin Mani Rabbanani. Why can Charlie keep the $20 even if he changes his mind? That's how he's reading the Mishnah. Because Magbia Metzia Lechavero doesn't work. Okay. But if everybody agrees that an ani can pick up for an ani, and you can pick up a Metzia for somebody else, and the only question is if your 2 stages removed, but if you're a poor person, you can pick payoff for a poor person, and if you get a Metzia, you can pick a Metzia for somebody else, if you see a Metzia. So how money? So why does Charlie get to keep the $20 if he picked it up for me? Lo Rabbanan v'lo Rabbi Eliezer. According to this, both the rabbis and Rabbi Eliezer say that if you're an ani, you can pick and pay it for someone else. And if you have a Metzia, you can take it for someone else. So if everybody agrees, Magbia Metzia Lechavero Kana Chavero, why does Charlie get to keep the $20 when he changes his mind? He picked it up for me. And the answer is, the Gemara says, Amar Le Masnisin to Amar Tchila. No. When Charlie says, I'm taking it for myself, he's not changing his mind. Charlie says, when he comes back with the $20 to me, he says, I picked it up initially for myself. That's, I think, how we read the Mishnah. Okay? So that's the question. How do you read the Mishnah? The Mishnah says, Charlie can say, I picked it up for myself. It's mine. So one way of reading the Mishnah is, even if he picks it up for me, he can then change his mind and say, I'm keeping it. Reading that, the Mishnah is telling you, Magbia Metzia Lechavero, Lo Kana Chavero. Even if he picked it up for me, I don't own it yet. And he can change his mind until he hands it over. And the other way of reading it is, no, he's only entitled to keep it if he claims he initially picked it up for himself. But if he admits he picked it up for me, I own it because Magbia Metzia Lechavero, Kana Chavero. So that issue that we've been debating, discussing all along, it depends how you read this Mishnah and what Charlie is claiming when he says that he's keeping it. Okay, so we'll pick up with this tomorrow.
How does the concept of Zakin Adam Shalom